Welcome, everybody. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator at McNally Robinson Booksellers in Winnipeg. We're coming to you live tonight from Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. Thank you all so very much for joining us here this evening for the celebratory online launch of Vignettes from My Life by Tannis Richardson, published by Heartland Associates. Tonight, Tannis is joined in conversation by our longtime friend, Terry MacLeod. They'll be discussing the book's contents before we move along to some questions from you, fine viewers out there. You'll notice there is a Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom screen, so please do feel free to click that button at any time if a question occurs to you. Tannis's marriage to George Richardson, ultimately head of one of Canada's most prominent companies, thrust her into the national and international spotlight, but her heart and her many volunteer efforts have always centered on Manitoba. Following the death of their eldest child, Pamela, of juvenile diabetes at just 29, Tannis co-founded Starry Starry Nights here in Winnipeg, which over the past half-century has raised many millions for research into the disease. She continues to contribute to this confounding illness with the sales of her book, as all proceeds will go to the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation of Canada. Over the decades, Tannis has been involved with any number of as a volunteer and supporter of many organizations, including the Health Sciences Centre, the Winnipeg Art Gallery, the Manitoba Opera Association, the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra, and she has been a leading champion and volunteer fundraiser with the Winnipeg Art Gallery. Her support has extended to the Friends of Upper Fort Garry, the Winnipeg Library Foundation, the Manitoba Museum, United Way Winnipeg, the Canadian Foundation for AIDS Research, the Royal Aviation Museum of Western Canada, and the Kidney Foundation of Canada. Your host for this evening is a former CBC Information Radio and Weekend Morning Show host, namely Terry MacLeod, who has established himself over decades as a respected, informed, and compassionate interviewer. Terry is currently the host and producer of the soon-to-be-released and absolutely fascinating-sounding podcast, Prairie Design Lab, with the Faculty of Architecture at the University of Manitoba. I'd invite you all to join me in putting your virtual hands together and warmly welcoming Terry MacLeod and Tannis Richardson.
John, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And hello, Tannis.
Hello, Terry.
And congratulations on a life well lived. But you know what? Many Manitobans, we feel as if we know you through your community work and all that charitable work that you do, through your late husband, George, through your children, your doctor, father, through the Richardson companies. But reading your book, I discovered there's a whole lot more to you that we don't know. Why did you decide to reveal so much in this book?
Well, Terry, I have always enjoyed remembering my encounters with people and incidents that happened. And I had sort of just collected them in my mind for years. And then it was suggested that maybe I might make an oral history of some of my experiences. And Janet Walker at the University of Winnipeg was, we started to do oral sessions. And then it seemed to evolve, it's like a snowball going down a hill, And so it was, I thought that maybe, we could put the stories down and see what happened. And the book that is launching now is the result of that. And of course, I have many more stories. I won't threaten to write a second book, but it was wrought with my encounters as I went wherever I was, Winnipeg or in any country, whatever. It was the people that I remembered so much. I didn't remember all the cathedrals and all the things, but I did remember the people that I encountered.
One story I have to say that I didn't expect was how your mother dealt with sewer backup in the basement of your house in Tuxedo.
Well, isn't that something? Mother was about practical. She was born in Killarney. There were 3 girls born to my grandparents, And Mother was one of the early attendees at the home economics at the University of Manitoba. But she was, above all, a practical person. She really, she had all that knowledge from growing up on a farm, and so that she learned how to turn her hand to almost any situation. And I suppose she picked up along the way that how to block a sewer. And of course, Tuxedo was on a very problematic ground, and every so often things happened. So she just availed herself of a bag of and
a bag of flax, right?
Flax. That was available at the time, and she kept it in the basement laundry room just in case, and had to do it once or a few times. She just put it in the sewer, and when the water came up, it hardened, and that was
wow. Now, you also, at your mother's knee, you learned a lot about public speaking really early on. She used to practice her speeches on you, right?
Yes. Not on me.
No.
She would look in the. She said, if I can look at myself in the mirror, I can talk to anybody. So I would sit. She had it was. Her bed was in the bedroom, and I would sit cross-legged on the foot of the bed and watch her and listen to her practice her speeches, and so that was I just absorbed that and put it to use when I needed it.
Now, you mentioned her marvelous sisters, who you call Frankie and Bunty, growing up in Killarney, but especially Frankie had ambitions way beyond Killarney. Where did she want to go?
She wanted to go to China. From the time she was a young girl, she was determined to go to China. She took her normal degree at university, and so she applied in Shanghai, and off she went. And she was there for about 7 years.
Wow.
She would come home. She taught expatriate children, and she would come home on holidays. And in the book, I mentioned us walking down Portage Avenue at Christmas Eve and just feeling like a couple of schoolgirls. But the one thing that, of course, is I think the interesting one of them, she, as I say, she traveled all over the South Seas to different places, but she did go to Egypt and was there when the Tutankhamun tomb was opened. And she
actually met Howard Carter, the man who was the archaeologist who opened it, right?
As a matter of fact, she sat next to him at dinner.
Really?
Yes. And but the curse, of course, was that anybody who was there when the sarcophaguses were opened would die a tragic death. And I don't want to tell all my stories, but the years later, she was home for Christmas, and when she went back, it was very foggy over Los Angeles, and the plane crashed into a mountain, killing everybody.
Oh.
And there's the curse, that she was there and at the opening of the tomb, and she died a violent death. And my aunt, Bunty, who was her younger sister, went to Los Angeles, and I got the names of all of the crew, the pilots and the stewardess and everybody, and she visited each one of their homes to suggest that nobody felt that it was their fault, that to tell them how sorry she was that they had lost a member of their family.
What a sweet thing to do. Now, your father, Dr. Paul Thorlickson, was a very hard-working fellow from early on, but one summer when you were what, 13, he came up with this plan for a huge Manitoba family expedition. Where did you go?
Well, in medicine in those days, the doctor was on call for morning, noon, and night, and in between. And I remember passing their bedroom in the hall, and I had heard the telephone ring, but I didn't hear Dad speaking. Well, I went in, and he was so tired that he'd stuffed the receiver under his pillow and gone back to sleep. So I pulled it out and took the call, and I gave it to him. We had a camp at Panema, but every time he arrived there, somebody wanted him back in the city. So he decided we better go somewhere where nobody could reach us. And so he got in touch with the Hudson's Bay Company and obtained 3 freight canoes, at least, loaned them. And we had 6 Cree guides. And the story is in the book, so I'm not going to tell it all.
No, but it's a great adventure, though.
But it was down the Nelson River, all the way to Thicket Portage. And we had one day we had 9 portages. And our Cree guides were just absolutely wonderful. And we each had a paddle, so we could do our job on the way up. And my name is Tannis, which is Cree, and it means daughter in Cree.
Really? Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yes. How do you like that with a Thorlickson surname?
Wow.
And
yes.
So it was just a very happy event.
Now, in Winnipeg, you began to volunteer early on with this little group called the Humpty Dumpty Club, and it led to a life of volunteer work. But what was the Humpty Dumpty Club?
Well, I don't remember any meetings particularly, but I do remember going to the hospital on Saturday morning with Dad, and he'd go on his rounds, and I would go to the children's ward and read to them and play with them, and just until Dad was ready to go home, and off we went again. And then that superseded when I was in university. Being a volunteer aid nurse. And of course, we all had to wear these starched aprons and caps and flat shoes and all of the rest. And, I'm not going to tell my stories from there because I think they're in the book.
But speaking of university, though, you tell an utterly fascinating tale that is an object lesson for a lot of young people going to university and facing the challenges that they might sometimes find overwhelming.
Yes. At that time, they had a Freshie King and a Freshie Queen and so forth. There was much to do about all of that. And I would say probably that I had the misfortune of being chosen Freshie Queen in my first year of home economics. Well, there were pep rallies at noon, and everybody you saw, you thought you should smile at because they knew who I was, but I didn't. You know what I mean? It was very awkward, and just too many diversions. And so for the Christmas report, my marks were not sufficient to go on with university, and I was asked to leave. And so naturally, what was I supposed to do then? Well, Mother was on the board of the university at the time, and and of course she knew Dr. Smith very well as the president, and so she got in touch with him and said, have you any idea of what we should do? This is terrible. And he said, well, Gladys, what do you think? How do you think I've done? and she said, well, of course, you're the president of the university. Then he said, well, how do you think Winston Churchill did? And she said, this is nonsense. What are you talking about? He said, we were both asked to leave our university at halftime. We were asked to leave because we were not doing well enough and settling down to the work that needed to be done. So he said, let's just make the plan for Tannis and see how we're going to help her get on with this. And when I was speaking to the graduating class a couple of years ago, here I was giving them, having been kicked out of university. I was asked to give the address at the graduation, and one point I wanted to make was that they would have their careers, they would have a lot to do in life, but they would benefit greatly if they did volunteer work and helped others and so forth and so on. And I have a story in the book that shows that it's just whatever an individual can do. It doesn't mean a lot of dollars. It means your time, your caring, and all of that sort of makes it worth. It balances your lifestyle.
Yes. Now, in the summer of, what was it, 48, before you got married on Halloween of 48, your mother took you to London, and it was just, 3 years after the war. What was London like?
Well, I went with my mother and my father.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, I'd never been to London before, and they had planned this, way before, so we carried on with it. I was engaged in the spring, and then we were away for the summer. It was just a sort of a broadening to introduce me to some of our relatives in Norway, and just giving me a better view of the world and what was out there and how different people, and of course they still were very short of food and things in England, and so I remember up in Scotland, we were driving and I saw a candy store, and I said, I really would like some candy. So we stopped, and I got out, and there was a line up for the candy, and so I stood in line. And when I finally got up to the counter, I said, I think I'd like some of this, and she said, well, could I have your coupons? And I said, I'm terribly sorry. I'm not from here. I'm from Canada, and I don't have any coupons. And so I'm sorry. That's fine. And the man behind me said, I would like you to have my coupons. And he presented them, and of course I accepted them because it was such a nice gesture, and the tones like that you get from people that live there, and it's very special. You look at all the cathedrals and all the churches and all the things, but often it's the people that you meet that you remember.
Now, I see in the background something that is very much connected to that visit to Britain in the summer of 48. Do I see on your table there a silver tea kettle?
You do.
Tell us about that and why it was so important to you. Look at that gorgeous thing. Hold it right up. Oh, yeah. So what's the story of that, Tannis?
This is, of course, when I was first married, and was still, they have it for ladies to have afternoon teas with their friends and so forth and so on. And you asked a special friend to pour. And Mrs. Richardson had given us as a wedding present a whole silver tea set, which had the teapot, the coffee pot, the cream sugar, and the tray. And of course, most things came from Burke's in those days. I'll just take a little aside. I received a box one day, and I took out what I thought was for my, and then I seemed to feel something in the bottom, and I took away the tissue paper, and there was a silver tray there. And I thought, I didn't think anybody would send 2 gifts from, so I phoned Burke's and said, I have a tray here that I don't think was meant for me. And they were just, oh, really? We didn't know where that had gone. Obviously, somebody was packing a box and put the tissue paper on, and then the box looked empty. So we put yours on top. So they said, we're delighted to have it back. Anyway, I decided that with the Mrs. Richardson's gift, that I would like this tea. It had hot boiling water in it, and it has a little
heater down below, right?
Heater under here.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, I'll probably find that in England somewhere. So Mom and I would go off, and Dad was visiting hospitals and things, but Mom and I would go off, and we did London. We didn't find it, and we went to Paris and kept looking for my tea kettle. And finally we went up to Scotland, and we were walking down the street, and here was this beautiful, beautiful store full of silver things. And so we both immediately made a right turn and went down the steps and into the store, and on a table there was a tea kettle. And so the proprietor came up and said, what could he do for you ladies? And I said, that kettle over there, how much is it? And he told me in pounds, which was exactly the amount my grandmother had given me. And I said, there's a crest on it. Could you tell me what the crest is? And so he said, I'll have to look at my book. And he went back, and he came back, and he said, that's the crest of the Aberdeen family, the Anderson family from Aberdeen. Mom and I looked at each other. My grandmother was an Anderson from Aberdeen. I said, that was meant for me.
Oh, absolutely.
There were other Andersons in Aberdeen, and it didn't really matter which family it was, but it was just the fact that it was her maiden name.
Nice. Let's come back to this side of the water. And speaking of water, so you move into Wellington Crescent in 48, and then along comes the flood of 1950. How did it affect your world in that flood?
Well, like it affected it. Our house was on one side of Wellington Crescent, and it wasn't the water came up to Mrs. Richardson across the street. And so Kathleen and Gran decided that they'd better move out. And I said, well, you come over to us. And which was a little difficult because Gran was waving her crutch with a white flag on it as they came across Wellington Crescent in a canoe. In a canoe? Yeah. And landed at our front door and came in, and we had a pup at that time, and he was gnawing away at some of the things in the house. But anyway, we managed, and one day down Kingsway came. What do you call those boats that the Navy have? The duck boats. The duck boats, exactly. The DUKW boat. Yes, yes. And I think I did look it up on the internet and found out why it was called a duck, but I can't tell you. But this was kind of a boat that was amphibious, but also had tires that could drive on the road, right? And had a propeller, right? That's right. And my brother Bob was standing in all his glory and as in his officer's uniform at the front, and it looked a bit silly because here was this duck boat going down Kingsway. And and he was standing alert at the front of it. So you know, it was quite a time for everybody, and that was just the first of you know, many floods that when we moved out to the farm. Of course, we thought that the flood was going to go south of us, and they found a spring in the river that it wouldn't be, so they moved up where they are, and then we were left on the wrong side of the river. So
that's the farm that you call Briarmead out on St. Mary's Road on the river, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And you, I mean, the house was completely flooded in '97, right?
That was when we were out at the farm. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
The our dike broke, and when the river came rushing, we had windows that went from the basement all the way up to the second floor, and it was well, I've never been in a war zone, but it certainly sounded. All of the glass shattered, and a few days later, you know, when the water was about 6 feet on the main floor, a mallard duck came swimming through the hallway. You know, you had to see the funny thing about at that time, because the people who came to sandbag came, and some of them stayed all night and sandbagged, and we had a walk-in freezer where we had ordered in so much food, and Salisbury sent their stew that they were famous with, and people would be having their meal at the breakfast room table, and I'd come down the stairs and didn't know anybody, but they were getting their food, and then I had a rack that had cigarettes on it and other things that they might like to have through the day. And we met some awfully nice people that way. And we never saw them again, of course.
You know, speaking of nice people, I have to say the story that you tell about your dog groomers was a very sweet story. And it was one that had a very contemporary feel to it, in the sense that you got to know them and you came to help them. Tell us a bit of that, would you?
Well, do you want me to tell all my stories? Nobody's going to buy the book.
Well, that story, I have to say, I found especially touching. You want me to tell it?
Sure. Yes.
But you had these dog groomers on Osborne, a male couple who the dogs loved, and you really liked them. One of the men died, and the other man, as it turns out, this was a gay relationship, and the man who was still living said, "I have to move out of the house because the law is such that I can't stay here. I'm going to be broke. I have no money." And you helped him by buying some, because they were collectors of beautiful dinnerware, and you helped him.
And antique cars.
Wow.
So, you know, it was a sad situation, and you say the law. There was nobody. The partner that was left had no rights, and the other man's family came and took everything, and so.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to mention about the book too, Tannis, is that there are a lot of photographs in the book that are yours. You were an avid photographer, right?
Yes, from very young, actually. I had a little Univex camera, and I don't think anybody living today knows what a Univex camera is, but it was a little box sort of thing. And the first picture I remember, I was experimenting, and there was a picture of King George V in the paper. I thought it was rather nice, so I cut it out. And then I borrowed my brother's tripod for their chemistry set, and put the picture on the carpet underneath, and then I put my little Univex through the tripod. And took a picture, and it turned out quite well, actually.
Now, another thing that was a big interest in terms of your photography was your kids, and there's a picture of your daughter and her best friend, what, way up on the roof of your house?
But I think I've done one thing that has I've never panicked, particularly at a situation. I stop for a moment and say, what do I do about it? And so this one day that Ashley, Everett, and Karen were playing in the house, and then I didn't hear anything. And so I wondered where they were, and I went and looked for them, and I went outside and looked for them. And after circling the house a couple of times, I heard this little voice, Mom, we're up here, and we can see Kelvin's school. And oh, hello, girls. There they were sitting on the top of the chimney. There must have been a cover on it. And because we never lit a fire at the Wellington Crescent house. And so I said, just stay where you are, girls. Don't move. I'll be right back.
And this was on top of the chimney on the third floor roof of the house. Right?
And if people look in the book and see the picture of the house, they'll see the chimney sticking up at the right-hand side. And that's where they were. And I rushed into the house and grabbed my camera and went out and took their picture. And I said, now, girls, I want you to come down just the way you went up, and one at a time, and just be very careful. And I stood there and watched them do it. They came down, and they had found a ladder and sort of a trap door that I'd never, having lived in the house many years, had never seen. But they found it.
Resourceful children, right?
Exactly.
Can you tell me a little bit of the story about Hartley? I think it was Hartley, and No Dollar, No Rabbit.
Oh, oh dear. Well, that was rather fun. Hartley loved rabbits, and he had rabbits in the city, and then he had rabbits at the farm. Then he took them to the lake. And of course, we had little rabbits. If you have to have one rabbit, you might as well have a few more. And so he took them to the lake. And we lived on Coney Island at that time, just at the point of Cameron's Point. And Hartley had his rabbits there. And his friend Patrick Coyne came over and decided he'd like to have a rabbit. And so they were pretty small. So we said, I think you better wait a bit. But anyway, eventually he came over to get his rabbit. And Hartley had told him it would be $1 for the rabbit. And so Patrick arrived and said, I'm here. And Hartley said, well, where's your dollar? And, and Patrick said, oh, I didn't bring it. And Hartley said, well, no dollar, no rabbit. And so George was there at the time, and he took out $1 bill and he said, Hartley, I just want you to look at this. Andrew's father's signature is on the $1 bill. He's the... and
he was head of the Bank of Canada, right?
That's
yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, I said, Hartley, you can be sure that Patrick will be back. And Hartley brought himself up like this, and he said, no dollar, no rabbit. Which meant that Patrick had to go home and get his $1. And then he got the rabbit.
Let's shift gears a little bit to a kind of more poignant period in your life about your daughter, Pamela. And I think it was June 29th, 1961, she was diagnosed with juvenile diabetes. What signs did you see in her as juvenile diabetes began to develop in her?
She had gone down to the lake to Tim and Shirley Richardson's camp and their children, and had spent the week with them. And then I went down to the lake and couple of days after she came home, I noticed that she was putting her head down on the table, and she was getting up and going to the bathroom, and she just wasn't herself. So Mrs. Richardson was going to drive back into Winnipeg, and I phoned her and said, could Pam and I drive up with you? And which we did. And I took her to her pediatrician the next day, and it was just like that. There was no question. There was no explanation. It was just diagnosed that she had diabetes. And so she went in the hospital right away, and I had to get used to. So there was so much that we had to adjust to, that any family does, except that back then there weren't the connections between doctors and different people that she needed to be in touch with. It's a George's aunt had diabetes in later years, and she was one of Dr. Banting's first patients. But that's all I knew about diabetes. I was a doctor's daughter, but I had to, go and get the dictionary and find out what it was all about. So from then on, it was a challenge, and the family, we decided that we would all be better off if we ate the same thing as Pam did, so that she wouldn't feel different. We wouldn't have gravy, and we wouldn't have desserts and that sort of thing. So, it was a challenge, but Pam was, she was very accepting of it, and she learned to give herself her injections, and so. You do what you have to do.
But her health deteriorated.
Yes.
Quite catastrophically, right?
Well, and when she was a teenager, she just rebelled. She said, I'm going to die anyway. So, and she just thought she could have what she liked and do what she liked. And I didn't blame her. It was a pretty rigid. And now today, there's just so many reasons that people can cope with it. I had to have pads made to write on and sectioned off, so I could keep track of her blood sugars and all the things that we needed to give to the doctor to see how she was balanced. And so she was very brave. She gave herself her injections. She learned how to do it on an orange. That seemed to be the standard way to learn. And but she was really, really very good about it until she just got fed up with it and said
she began to lose her vision. Is that right?
She became blind. Yes. And at that point, there was a Dr. Ferguson, and he decided it was time to have a whole ward at St. Boniface for diabetics, and then we found that the nurses, male nurses and female nurses, were trained, and so when she was there, and they would tell her they were in the room and tell her what they were doing and how they were going to, look after her, and that was, and then.
But she died at 29. Right?
Yes, well, I was up in the hospital room, and she was going on peritoneal dialysis the next day. And of course, now I thought it was just one more step. But she said, she rubbed her arm and she said, Mommy, I'll never go on peritoneal dialysis. And I just thought she was getting pretty fed up, but she died that night.
But you took huge inspiration from the need to care for people with juvenile diabetes, type 1 diabetes, and you you didn't let up until you raised millions of dollars.
Well, one does that, you know. That's what you do.
Well, if you're Tannis Richardson, you do that.
Oh, I love, my goodness. There are many people out there who do wonderful things. And that was what I felt I wanted to be involved in.
And you wanted to create a starry night for all of us.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes. Well, I wanted the name of the gala to be a song. And and a starry night seemed to be. And the first year we were out on the plaza of City Hall, and the stars were up there, and it was nice.
Tell me the little story about the woman you met who wanted to make a little modest donation that meant so much to you.
Oh, you. This is my treasure that I, above all else. And yes, well, it started with me, George and I going to Toronto to the juvenile diabetes gala there. There were about 1,000 people there, I think, and Helene Shift was the president. And so we had a lovely evening, and the next morning, I phoned Helene and was waxing eloquent about what a wonderful evening it was. And she, I got to know her very well, but at that moment she said, "Well, that's all very well, Tannis, but what are you going to do in Winnipeg?" And she had thrown the gauntlet down. So I went home, wondering what I could do. And a couple of weeks later, I was at a dinner party, and Don Ferguson was sitting next to me, and he just arrived in Winnipeg as head of the CBC Prairie Division. And he suddenly turned to me and he said, "Tannis, what are we going to do about juvenile diabetes?" And I said, "Don, who are we?" And he said, "CBC and you." And I said, "Well, tell me more." And they were having the Air Force come to Winnipeg to the Playhouse Theatre, and they were going to do all the billing for that. Except we were. He said, "You sell the tickets, and it'll all go. What you raise will go to JDF at the time."
JDF, yeah.
And so that I got there were some couples in Winnipeg who I knew of that had children with diabetes, and so we got together, and I phoned Bill Norrie and said, "Do you think we could have an event on the plaza of City Hall?" And he said, "Well, we've never had one, but what do you have in mind?" And I said, "We'd like to have a dinner on the plaza." And he said, "Well, I think that sounds like a good idea." And so then I phoned a friend and said, "How would you like to put on a fashion show for us?" And he said, "Well, that's a good idea. I'll do that." And so forth and so on. And the Weston did the catering, and we owned the Weston at that time. So it was rather nice because I knew all the people at the Weston. And so we got too busy, and we thought it might rain. So Air Canada loaned us umbrellas, and we just had so the morning of the event, I was standing looking around the plaza, and I looked up at the building that was coming, and the steps were coming down onto the plaza. And a little lady went over to the railing and took a hold of it and got herself down to the plaza and limped over to me and said, "What's happening here?" And I said, "Well, it's going to be a very lovely evening, and everybody that's coming will be donating to finding a cure for diabetes." And she looked at me, and she looked at her well-worn purse, and she opened it, and she took out a $1 bill. And she said, "I hope this will help you find a cure for diabetes." And of course, the tears streamed. I thanked her so much. And as she walked away, looking across the plaza, I thought, there is a philanthropist. She gave what she could for the betterment of others. It was a very poignant moment.
Now, we have a question, Tannis, if you wouldn't mind addressing it, from Winnipegger Brenly Carrington. And she says, what do you hope people get out of reading your book? And what's the most important lesson you ever learned in life? So those are two big questions.
I don't think one can really pick one thing. I hope I learned all the way along and wanted to learn from other people how they felt and so forth and so on. And so all through my life, I don't remember all the cathedrals I went into or the one thing or another, but I remember the people that I happenstanced in meeting on the street or in forever, just by here's a silly example. I was sitting in Shoppers waiting to get my flu shot. And there was a lady sitting beside me, and it looked as if we were going to be sitting there for a while. So I turned to her and I said, "Are you from Winnipeg?" And she said, "No, I'm from Kenora." I said, "Are you really? Oh, isn't that nice? Because we spend the summers there." And so we launched into a wonderful conversation about how things were going and what the school systems were and so forth and so on. So, I don't think there's there are quite a lot. I think I have enough stories to write another book, but I don't think that everybody that's been helping me will like to hear that.
Now, the proceeds from this book, Tannis, go to the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, right?
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry?
The proceeds of this book, Vignettes from My Life, go to the foundation, right?
Yes. I hope that, the book is selling for a certain amount, but I'm sure that there'll be people who feel it's a wonderful cause and will add more to that.
Well, I have a copy in front of me, Tannis, as you can see. And as you can see from all the Post-it notes, those are the stories that I found interesting. And there are many, many stories, great photographs, maps. Oh, it's a beautiful book. And it's only $26.95, right?
Yes, well, that's whatever people think it's worth. But I think that most people know about juvenile diabetes, and they know that, and I have had friends who I've had given a book from here, and have given an additional amount for it, and that's the main reason for it, is to find a cure for diabetes.
Well, Tannis, I'm thinking I need to let you go now so you can get back to writing your next volume.
Oh, Terry, you're always full of interesting ideas.
Tannis, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this, and congratulations on a marvelous book and a life that continues to be well-lived and full of generosity.
Oh, thank you for helping me do this, and I've gained a lot of wonderful people who've helped make the book possible. So thank you.
Shall we hand things back now to John Taves at McNally Robinson? John?
Thank you, Terry.
Hello,
and thank
John.
you so much, Tannis.
Yeah.
I'll close by pointing out the copies of Vignettes of My Life are available from McNally Robinson booksellers, either online, over the phone, or in person. Tannis has very kindly signed some copies of the book for our Grant Park location, and we also mail out books if anyone is interested. This event was streaming via YouTube, and a recording will remain if you'd like to revisit the conversation or pass the link along to anyone else you believe might be interested in watching it. In closing, I'd like to sincerely thank Heartland Associates for publishing this and helping to facilitate and organize this evening, to Terry MacLeod, of course, for his inimitable hosting, and of course, to Tannis Richardson. Thank you all and have a truly lovely night.
Bravo, Tannis.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Terry.